That opening bird's eye view is extraordinary on many levels, just visually, but also theologically.
We're seeing a God's eye point of view on the film. It seems chaotic, but it's actually incredibly intentional.
We spend 2 hours as privileged surveillors. We see characters when they are vulnerable. We are privy to their secrets. We share their most intimate moments. Every movie that we watch is a conversation.
Welcome to the Catholic Film Club. My name is Michael Coy, and this month we're talking about The Conversation, directed by Francis Ford Coppola, starring the late Gene Hackman. Earlier this month, I released a video essay about the film, introducing some ideas that I had about it, but also asking 3 questions about the movie. Why does the main character always wear a raincoat? Why does he love jazz? And his name is Harry Call. Who's watching Harry? You wrote in some answers. We've got some ideas too, and I'm very excited to have our special guest here to help us break this movie down, Dr. Richard White. Dr. White, thanks for joining me.
Oh, I'm excited to be here. You don't have to twist my arm to talk about a great film.
Well, I'm excited too because as long as I've been at Benedictine, I'm coming up on my 4th year. As soon as I got here and people realized that I loved movies, they said, well, you got to talk to Richard White. We haven't talked till this very day, so I guess I had to create a podcast to give an excuse for us to meet up.
Well, hopefully this will be the beginning of many conversations.
What is you're a professor of theology at Benedictine.
Right. And
I understand that you're writing a book, though, about cinema and beauty. What is it about movies in general that have impacted you personally? What is it about this art form that moves you?
I think that as I look back on my life, at every turn, movies have been there to help me consider the great questions, whether it's friendship or love or any number of themes. It's because it is a genuine art form, it's all there. And for me, yes, I've been entertained by movies, but I delight in the art form and this looking at life through images visually is a way to go into a character and identify with it and look at something from a particular point of view, and then to come back out of that and see things that we didn't see before, or that we knew, but we couldn't really appropriate without entering into this story. So that's what I'm looking for in great cinema. Does it express what is human truly or not?
Well, I'm glad you're saying that because, yes, this podcast, we say that it focuses on craft and conscience. And I find that a lot of film commentary today, it is very concerned mostly with the craft and how a director did this technically or did this cool editing style. But I want to just talk about engage with what movies are actually about. They should be about life, so let's actually engage with them. And sometimes that's going to have a theological realm. Sometimes it won't. But I mean, I think that I'm really glad I'm having you on for this film, The Conversation, starring Gene Hackman, because I think it's a perfect example of a movie that is really all about one person, the inner life of one person, but the aesthetics and the artistry completely reinforces that and puts us into his worldview. And so I just want to ask you as well, what is your relationship to this movie, The Conversation?
Well, I'm a child of the 1970s. So actually, Coppola and The Conversation fit into this time in my life that was so formative.
I'm very jealous.
Yeah, right. Well, but with The Conversation, I actually think that the 1970s, especially from about 1970 to 1974, 4 or 5 year period there, where there was an honesty in cinema and an artistry that I think is one of the high points of American cinema. check one. Okay. Also, I'm naturally drawn towards personal, intimate, character-driven movies. Check. Okay. And then Gene Hackman is one of my favorite actors. So the Conversation is a film from the early 70s that I think speaks honestly. It is a character-driven movie, and it stars one of my favorite actors, Gene Hackman. So I've always had great affection for The Conversation, and I've watched it many times in my life.
And in this movie, he plays a surveillance expert named Harry Caul, C-A-U-L, who is hired to surveil a couple. For what reason, he doesn't know. He makes a very outward gesture to say that he doesn't care what they're talking about. It's almost, there's a theme in this movie of hearing without listening. But before we get into that, Gene Hackman, as an actor, what you say that he's one of your favorite actors. What is it about this man?
Yeah,
and
one of my
we're talking
favorite
in the wake of his death, a very tragic death as well.
Several weeks ago.
That's right.
Well, he brings a kind of consummate toughness and power that you can't help but be drawn to, whatever role he takes on. I wouldn't call him necessarily an actor that has a wide range of roles, but he brings to every role that kind of sense of, he commands your attention. Even in movies which Gene Hackman has starred in that haven't been, frankly, that good, I'll watch them if Gene Hackman is in them because of that presence that he brings to a role. He's always the one that seizes the room, as it were.
Yeah, it's like there's a live grenade in the room, and maybe you don't even know if it's going to go off or not, but you know that it could. Which is why it's so interesting that he's portraying a very quiet, reserved, private person. But it doesn't seem to go against his powers. I think he's using his powers as an actor. I think it's perfectly utilized for that.
I think it's perfectly utilized, but I would say he's going against type. Let's not forget, he had made the French Connection before this movie, and which
is explosive.
Literally, right? We're in the 1970s, we're talking about Dirty Harry. We're talking about, gritty crime movies where there isn't going to be a whole lot of moral consideration to what's happening. But here he's playing this kind of reclusive tech geek. And yes, I agree, it doesn't go against his talents, but it is kind of stepping out of what he was known for at that time.
Yeah, it's like the character tries to fade into the background, but the irony is that the more he tries to fade into the background and push people away, the more people want to look. And I think that works perfectly because he's Gene Hackman, and you can't help but want to look at this guy and see what he's about.
Right.
I think too, what's great about him in this movie, I think it shows how important an actor is to filmmaking. We often will lionize a director, and of course Francis Ford Coppola's vision, and this is a very personal vision. It comes directly from him. It's written by him. But I think that what an actor can do is deepen the humanity of, let's say, a film that is playing quite a bit with metaphor, and quite a bit with, and could actually have a very incredibly cynical view of life. But an actor like Gene Hackman can bring warmth and humanity to that and give it another dimension.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Right. That's what great actors do.
Absolutely. Before we get into the plot and everything like that and how we might interpret what's going on with Harry Caul, why should people see The Conversation if they haven't?
Well, it works on so many levels. It works as a mystery. It works as a psychological thriller. Just that the theme of surveillance, if that was timely in 1974, right? This film has aged very, very well. It still is very timely because, of course, now that the issue of privacy, which this film looks at, is, even a much greater question in our time than it was perhaps in the early 70s. But also, we'll talk later about this cinematic technique, which I think is a reason to watch the film because some of the unique things that we see. But most of all, the biggest reason to watch this movie is because it is an amazing character study of the lead, played by Gene Hackman, Harry Call. And I think that Coppola takes us into this character uncompromisingly. And then we come back out of it, and I think if we've done a good job as an audience, we're much better for it.
Right.
So that's why we should watch the conversation, because it works simultaneously at all of these levels.
I think so too. So Harry Call is a surveillance expert, as we've said. We open in media res in a scene in the park while he is surveilling a couple, and he has a team of about 3 or 4 people who are helping him record audio in various ways, helping him record video in various ways, or taking photographs at least of this couple.
Well, he has an amazing opening shot, a kind of establishing shot, where we see this whole space, which is Union Square in San Francisco, from a bird's eye view. So we see the whole picture, the whole mass of humanity down there moving around, and we slowly zoom in, very slow. We begin to hear sounds. We're not sure what they are. And we realize that there is a couple. By the way, we see mime. We see a mime. We see a guy playing the saxophone. We see tons of people because it is a park after lunch, and people are there, a lot of people. We realize that we're focusing on 2 people, Mark and Anne, who are having a, quote, conversation by walking through Union Square. The problem is because there are so many people there, so many different kinds of noises, it's going to be a great challenge to surveil them. Entrance, the great surveiller, Harry Call.
And the mime that you mentioned is so interesting to me because this is one of a few figures in the film that you could say are kind of a stand-in for Harry Call because they are silent observers. And actually, the mime initially starts bothering Harry. We see a man in a translucent raincoat, and the camera begins to follow him, and we realize that this is our main character, Gene Hackman, but the mime will not leave him alone. Another example, or our first example of the man who does not want to be seen and yet is followed silently.
I think we have 3 stand-ins for Harry Call there.
Really?
We have the mime. We also have the saxophonist. And later we'll see that Harry plays the saxophone, so there's an association there. We also see a homeless person lying on a bench. Later in the movie, Harry will assume that position, and actually we will hear the dialogue from Anne at that moment when she is referring to the homeless person.
Yeah, she says when she sees a homeless man, she always thinks of the same thing, that he used to be someone's baby boy, and he had a mother and a father, and who loved him, and now...
Where are they now?
Yeah.
we will hear that exact dialogue at the moment that Harry assumes that pose of the homeless person.
That's right. Yeah. So we've right away this seemingly an event that seems to be free flowing and just casual events at a park. You've got multiple cameras going at the same time. I think Coppola said he was using 6 or 7 cameras. It seems chaotic, but it's actually incredibly intentional. And I love that bird's eye view because it's shot at a time of day when the shadows are very long and dark. And it gives you a different perspective. It makes you question the warped sort of nature of what we're seeing. Does that make sense?
It does. And I should also say that this scene forms the structure of the entire movie because what we don't know as a viewer when we first witness it is that we are going to be hearing that scene from slightly different points of view over and over and over, a kind of repetition where that scene takes on greater and greater significance as we're watching the film. And that's one of the things I love about the conversation is the structure. It's so fun because Coppola is putting us in a position where we're trying to, with the main character, Harry, solve a puzzle.
The fun thing too that you don't think, or I wasn't thinking about until rewatching it over and over again, is that when you revisit this conversation, you are seeing it in motion. You're seeing a film of it. You're seeing all these angles. But what you don't realize is that these are not Harry Call didn't have 6 cameras stationed on these people that he's surveilling. He had a photographer, but he didn't have cameras. So really, what you're seeing, these repetitions, are only a representation of reality. You might find it's just. I think that's a very subtle detail that it's a way that cinema can trick you and therefore tell the truth.
Yes, exactly. There's a complexity to the scene. And you're exactly right. He's not just going back to that and cutting different points of the conversation. When he filmed it, he actually took the actors to a different square in San Francisco and had them repeat the lines again while they were walking around this other square. And he used the audio of that.
Oh, fascinating.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, and he's going to be listening to this conversation again. Now, later in the scene, I think there's a significant moment where Harry returns to the surveillance van, where much of his equipment is being set and where the recordings are going, and he's with his partner John Cazale, and his partner is a much less of a serious person than he is, and he's just he's a more curious person, and he just like a guy at any job is like, oh, I wonder what they're talking about. Is it the IRS? Is that why we're recording this? And Gene Hackman says, like, I don't care what they're talking about.
Yes.
All I want is a nice fat recording.
Right.
And it's that idea of trying to separate himself from the outside world and somehow be someone who observes but does not care or listen.
Yes, this introduces a question that we will continue to think about throughout the movie: is what should be the relationship that Harry has professionally with his role as a moral person. And he does seem to want to separate that off and says, look, I just turned in the tape. It really doesn't concern me. But yet that's what will come back to him and begin to gnaw at him when he gradually discovers there's something more going on.
Yeah.
So that's part of the mystery of the film.
Yeah. In the following scenes, the irony about Harry Call that's reinforced is that his whole his job, his vocation, if you could say, is to pry into the private lives of people, and yet he is incredibly private, militantly so. When he goes into his apartment, he has an alarm that goes off. Probably one of the few people that had that in the 70s.
He also has to open about a half a dozen locks
Yes.
on his door,
Yes.
even to get into his apartment.
And he's very, when his landlady, I'm not sure if it's his landlady who wishes him a happy birthday, but he notices that people are wishing him happy birthday, and he's like, I didn't tell anybody about this. Finds out that his landlady might have been prying into his mail, like kind of peeking into his mailbox a little bit.
So actually, the surveiller maybe is not always on his game. Right? We see that several times where he slips up. I mean,
yes.
Actually, she leaves him a birthday present inside his apartment.
I know.
So he goes to all this trouble to keep people out, and he finds out that actually someone is in there. Someone does know his phone number. Someone does know that it's his birthday, right? All of these things which he tried to keep secret.
Later on, we'll see that he's even more at odds with these kind of dueling desires in his life to be private and yet to reach out to someone, because he has a girlfriend who how would you describe this situation?
Well, the situation is he's paying the rent and she is there for him. So we see him early on in the film visit her. Amy Frederick, I think, is the name of the character, played wonderfully by Terry Garr.
Yeah.
Who, by the way, is in another film with Gene Hackman, Young Frankenstein, where
That's right.
Terry Garr is there, and Gene Hackman has this incredible cameo as a blind. I just have to say it because it's one of my favorite comedic scenes of all time, where Frankenstein comes and meets Gene Hackman, who is playing the blind man. But anyway, Terry Garr,
unrecognizable.
Yeah,
actually.
unrecognizable. Terry Garr, and we realize, I think, something important about Harry's character there, that she is asking him questions and he is just puts a wall there. In fact, he lies to her over and over. He doesn't tell her what his line of work is. He doesn't reveal these details about himself to his lover. She's yearning for intimacy with Harry. All he wants is a kind of transaction.
Later at a party, and we'll talk more about this party as we go along, but he is talking to a woman who he's just met at a party and is starting a flirtation with them, and he is sort of going through the motions of this flirtation. She also is trying to just find a crack in the armor and get him to say something about himself. And they have this conversation. This is in his warehouse where he conducts all of his business, where he asks her. Basically, she doesn't know it, but he's talking about this woman that he kind of keeps in this apartment. I believe what he's saying is he's asking, imagine that you were a girl and there was someone who came to see you and you never knew when they were coming. You never knew anything about them. Right. Could you love them? And she asks, well, how would I know that he loved me? And he says, well, there would be no way of knowing.
Right. So we see that actually, even though he put on this act that he didn't want intimacy or real communion, he does. He deeply, because at the end of that scene with Terry Garr, with Amy, she tells him, I don't think I'm going to wait for you anymore. And obviously this disturbs Harry. So we see that even though he's putting on this act that he wants privacy and he doesn't really want to enter into lasting or authentic relationships with people. He does.
He does.
And he does actually want to know about what Anne and Mark are talking about. He is interested in the reality of the situation. So he pretends that he's not, but he actually does. We see that Harry does have this yearning for the truth, the yearning for communion, even though he denies himself of that over and over in the movie.
And how do you define communion in this case?
Well, authentic relationships. I mean, certainly he has professional relationships with his assistant, Stan, right? But even Stan doesn't know much about his life. He doesn't know, for example, that he used to live in New York City. So what I mean by that is real, genuine sense of communication with other people. Coming out of himself to begin to love in a human way. He doesn't do that. He seems incapable of it. But yet I think he wants it.
Coppola does a fascinating visual move in this film where he shows that whole little conversation, he does the same shot 3 times in a row. He starts on Meredith's face, dollies around to Harry, starts on her face, dollies around to Harry, and 3 times. And what we see there is the continuation of the idea of looking again and seeing something different. It seems to be the same, but it's different. This relationship that he could be starting with Meredith, it could be similar to the one that he had with Terry Garr, but it's not the same. It's different. There's a repetition, but it's only, the similarity is only an illusion in a way.
It's an illusion. In fact, she's there not because she has any affection for Harry, not because she really cares about him in any way. She's there to get these tapes of the conversation.
Yes.
So he's, again, the surveiller is duped.
I'd like to go back to the piece where we are introduced to Harrison Ford's character and the real plot is underway. So Harry has recorded these tapes. He has gotten them to a place that he thinks will be satisfactory to his client. He delivers the tapes to the director of this company, this executive, but the executive isn't there. It's his assistant,
Martin Stett.
Right. Played by a very young Harrison Ford before he had done anything worth noting, before he was Han Solo. And there's a contentiousness there because Harry wants to deliver this directly to his clients, and here's this middleman trying to get in the way. And
it's an important scene because this is when Harry begins to suspect that there's more to this than meets the eye. I think Martin at one point says, well, you've heard the tapes, you know how dangerous it can be.
Right.
And Harry is probably thinking, no, actually I don't, right? So I think part of the motivation, I agree with you, he's a perfectionist. He wants to deliver the tapes directly to the director, but he's also curious now, more curious about these tapes. So we see him then he goes back to his studio. He works with the audio a little more, but there's a portion of it that he can't decipher because of extraneous sound that's going on in the square. So he works with it. He brings out what I gather is a fictitious machine that helps him clean up the sound almost miraculously, and he's able
still impossible today.
It's still impossible today. But he hears the words exchanged between Mark and Anne. He'd kill us if he can.
If he had the chance.
If he had the chance, right. He'd kill us if he had the chance. So those are the words he hears. And that causes him to think, well, gosh, maybe this conversation is going to be used for nefarious purposes. Maybe the director now is going to kill Mark and Anne because they're having an affair, presumably. And he lived in New York City before, where one of his recordings had actually led to tragic consequences. So now he has a crisis of conscience whereby he thinks that he might need to protect them from the director when he hears this little piece of dialogue, which is a key piece of information that he had not heard from the tape before.
And after he's discovered this, we see later that talking about his guilt about people that were hurt in his previous life in New York City because of his work, we see him go to confession. And what do you think this confession scene reveals about Harry?
Well, I think it reveals a lot about Harry because, okay, so first of all, he says it's been 3 months since my last confession. Okay, this communicates to the audience that he is trying to to be a practicing Catholic on the one hand, but on the other hand, the actual content of the confession is rather sad because he, on the one hand, he asks for forgiveness that he took the Lord's name in vain, but hypocritically, he was just condemning Stan for the same thing. He says that he's had impure thoughts while simultaneously having a mistress, right? And he also confesses, I guess most importantly, that his work has led to people being harmed, and yet he says, I'm not responsible.
Right.
So it seems that Harry lacks contrition. He lacks what is necessary to properly receive forgiveness. So I think we learn that even though he has a Catholic consciousness, and to his credit, this crisis of conscience, which gives him moral qualms on the one hand. On the other hand, we see that there's something missing there too, that he really doesn't have contrition. He really hasn't come to terms with his own responsibility and these terrible events.
I find it so interesting in that scene too, another figure who observes but does not speak, the priest that he's confessing to, which it turns out is actually Gene Hackman's brother,
right,
on the other side of that confessional. Okay, so I think we've set up everything that Harry is going through internally. He's got this incredible guilt. He's kind of off his game now as the best surveillance guy who ever was. And he's now breaking his rules of he doesn't care about the people he's listening to, but he's now breaking these rules. He's really prying into he wants to save these people.
Yeah, he says he doesn't care about them, but actually, apparently he does.
Right. And that brings us to the moment back at the party with this woman who he's trying to start a almost obligatory flirtation with. Eventually, he gets very drunk, falls asleep. She tries to make love to him, basically, but he's just asleep. And he has this dream about Anne in the park. Reveals things about himself. Really reveals that he said I was sick as a boy, and just trying to reach out to her. But Anne, this figure in the dream, runs away from him, which is the way that, they've been, Anne and her lover have been in this mind. He keeps trying to reach out to them, but they're really just recordings on a tape. But now he wakes up and those tapes are missing. So his mission has failed. He realizes that this woman who seduced him was sent by Harrison Ford, by Stett, to steal them. He gets a call. He says, we have the tapes. We'll give you your money. We couldn't risk this. This is too important. So Harry goes to the office of the executive, finds out Robert Duvall is the executive, which is a good reveal.
A wonderful cameo.
Oh, yeah. Great to see those two titans together. I can't remember if they've ever been in a movie since, but Robert Duvall is listening to the tapes. He's distraught, and he hears the crucial information that of this apparent rendezvous that Anne and Martin, I believe,
Mark,
Anne and Mark are going to have. Remind me.
So it's an important plot point because during the conversation, they set up a rendezvous. It is the Jack Tar Hotel, 3 o'clock, room 773. So actually, everyone has the information needed to converge at what will be, we'll see how everything plays out. Because now the director, played by Robert Duvall, is presumably going to go to try to stop their affair. And also, simultaneously, Harry now is going there to try to listen in and figure out what's going on.
That's right. And then just complete major spoilers, like this is the full reveal of the film coming up. Basically, it turns out that Harry actually had no idea what was happening. The further that he looked in, the less, almost the further he got from the truth, because it turns out he'd kill us if he had the chance. This is the word that comes over and the phrase that comes over and over again. Well, it turns out that the phrasing was he'd kill us if he had the chance. And what happens is not that the executive is going to find the lovers and kill them in a fit of rage or in cold blood even. They are there to lure him to kill the executive.
Exactly.
And even what Gene Hackman perceives when he's in this other hotel, it takes him a while to even understand that. He believes that he is seeing the murder, that Anne's murder, that he's seeing the Mark and Anne being murdered. What it turns out is that they were the ones who were killing the executive, that it was a trap, and Harry was a part of that trap unwittingly.
A complete inversion of what he expected to happen. So it turns out that he was duped. In a sense, he thought that this recording was going to be used nefariously to kill Mark and Anne, when in fact it is the director's life who was plotted against.
And
so he's devastated.
Absolutely. And his attempt to redeem himself has been completely thwarted in a way. And yet, I think that what the ending of the movie shows is that, yes, his life as he knew it is over in a way, and yet just realizing that he had that desire in himself, I think that is a good thing. I think that's a good transformation, even if he...
Yeah, no, I agree that's a good thing, but do we want to go to that last sequence? Because it seems to me, while that was a good thing, he didn't fully take advantage of his opportunity for redemption, for asking for forgiveness and being genuinely contrite. There's a striking visual metaphor, I think, that comes into play. When we first see the apartment, we see a building through the window that is being demolished.
This is in that first scene where he's in his apartment. That first scene. Yeah.
Later in the movie, we will see Harry walk right adjacent to the rubble. And in the final sequence, Harrison Ford calls him and says, "We are watching you." So he realizes, he thinks that his apartment is being bugged. In fact, Harrison Ford plays back a recording of some sounds from Harry's apartment. So he goes in, he flies into this rage where he wants to find the bug, and he ends up demolishing his apartment, basically. So the visual metaphor is we saw the rubble coming down, the building, all the walls coming down, and now Harry's apartment becomes rubble. And the final scene, the movie ends with this wonderful pan of the rubble of Harry's apartment. It pans left, we see Harry playing the saxophone. It pans back to the rubble, and then back again to Harry. So for me, I have a hard time seeing redemption there. I think we see Harry in utter solitude at the end of the movie, and I find the ending slightly sad.
Maybe I'm feeling positive this morning or something.
Okay. Well, it's St. Patrick's Day.
It is St. Patrick's Day, although I'm not wearing green. But so yes, I love that you've. I had not actually thought about the fact of the construction outside, being a foreshadowing of the destruction of his own inner life, which is represented by this apartment, and he just tears it apart. And yes, we have that almost like a surveillance camera going back and forth,
Right.
and again that sense of repetition. There's something, I think that this is a chance where, because there's so much now to unpack about what this could mean, but I wonder if you would mind us getting into now some 3 questions that I asked in an introductory essay to this film.
I loved your questions.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I was trying to find some that were a little off the wall. And I want to start, and listeners also sent in their answers to these questions, so I want to read some of them too, because I think a lot of them are quite interesting. But one thing that we haven't really touched on, but I think is a crucial piece of Harry's characterization, is the fact that he is a jazz musician. In that last scene, we see Harry in the corner of his room, that in his demolished apartment, playing along to a jazz record with his saxophone. And I'm going to open with my last question in the video, which was, why does Harry love jazz? Mm-hmm. Why do you think he loves jazz? And why is this a crucial part of his character? Actually, I might read just an answer that my wife gave to this question, which I thought was interesting. Because he does not live in the moments. He lives in repeated, controlled moments because his life is so controlled. And jazz is an art form where you have to live in the moments. Where all music, really, if you play an instrument, that's when the music is happening. It's when you're playing it. That it's a way to balance out his life. Mm-hmm. That was her answer, just as sort of just a piece of characterization. But
so a kind of way of stepping out.
Yeah, getting out of his own head in a way.
No, I think that's really helpful.
Yeah. I think it's great when you, a movie like this, which I think deals heavily with metaphor, they're the best when they function on the practical level as well. And maybe you can read too far into it, like I tend to do, in symbolism, but that only reinforces something that is very practical about what the character
we're not
wants.
reading into anything when we recognize that the film begins with saxophone music and it ends with saxophone music. In other words, from the very first shot, we hear saxophone music. In fact, we see the saxophone in the opening sequence, and the saxophone is juxtaposed actually right in front of Harry, associating Harry with the saxophone.
You sent me that shot, and I'm going to put it on this. I'm going to put it up right now.
Absolutely love this shot. But so then the movie ends with Harry playing a saxophone. So to me, I kind of want to compare the two moments. And it seems like the first moment is a man playing a saxophone in a public setting. People are listening to it. There's joy. There's a sense of community that the music builds. In fact, jazz is at its best when you hear it live, when you go to a jazz club and you have a sense of the room. Cinema is best when it's seen at a movie theater with others, right? Yet at the end, and in fact, throughout the film, we see Harry playing the saxophone in solitude. He plays with a record, but he's in solitude. And then at the very end, we don't even have the record player anymore. He's utterly alone. So, and in fact, in another shot that I sent you, we see after he plays the saxophone, he puts his head down in dejection. So while it's intended, I think that's very wise. It's a way of him stepping out. It doesn't seem to fulfill that void that he's trying to overcome. And I look at that saxophone as his desire for this community that we saw in the park, but that he's not able to reach because he keeps it private.
But to find that little glimmer of hope again, Coppola said that he doesn't actually know, believe him or not, where the bug is in the room, or if there even
whether
is one.
there even is one.
But he has posited a theory that it's in the shoulder strap of his saxophone. And we've seen that Harry's been slipping. We see that in the confrontation with his rival at the Buggers convention, where he puts an obvious microphone into his pocket, which is this pen, and it's very obvious. Like who could not think this is what's happening at a Buggers convention, and yet he lets it slip, and it just shows that yes, it's a flaw, but it's a crack in his armor, and maybe this saxophone, maybe he suspects it too, but maybe he doesn't want to give that up. Maybe it's like the last thing that he's holding on to.
Well, I rewatched this film with my son, Philip, and he had a different interpretation of that last scene. He saw in that final shot of Harry playing the saxophone a real feeling of peace that he had, that maybe somehow this was kind of, yes, he tore up the apartment, but now he has this moment of peace. I guess that could be one way of looking at it, that he still has the saxophone. There is hope there that he will come out of the apartment and join a real human community. So I'm not saying that it's utterly devoid of hope, but...
Well, it's funny. So we're talking about different interpretations of the film. We're talking about different interpretations of this scene. I wonder if that can lead us into my second question, which was, who's watching Harry? And
I love this question.
So we've pointed out that there's some, of course, the whole supporting cast is watching Harry in some way, even though he doesn't want them to. There's these silent observers like the mime and the priest. And yeah, possibly the homeless man. Maybe he's not asleep. You don't know. But what do you think of this question about who's watching Harry?
Right. I think one of the things that's interesting about the film is the way that Coppola constructs it. He never cuts away from Harry.
Right.
That is to say that all of the action of the movie is either from the point of view of Harry, or Harry is in the scene, or we're looking at something that Harry sees or knows. It's very unusual in a film, because usually you're going to cut away to something else, some other subplot.
Even in Taxi Driver, this is kind of a precursor to, they cut away to another scene.
They cut away.
Yeah.
So it's very, I'm not saying that it's completely unprecedented, but it's unusual. And so as I was thinking about your question, really, for me, who is watching Harry? Well, Coppola has made sure that we are watching Harry. We become the surveillors of the surveiller. And, well, how are we going to do? What grade are we going to get? Harry doesn't finally do a very, technically, he gets the tape, but he loses the bigger sense of what it meant, right? So I think the challenge for us is to put together not only the puzzle of the tape, but to put together the puzzle of Harry, and to walk away from the movie with, well, what do we learn with being with this man for 2 hours? And then, if I may, really, that's what every movie is. Is we spend 2 hours as privileged surveillors. We see characters when they are vulnerable. We are privy to their secrets. We share their most intimate moments. Every movie that we watch is a conversation. So how are we going to use those 2 hours? Are we going to enter into the conversation with integrity and really step back outside of it and grow from it? Or will we divulge our own maybe worst elements or our own whims? So to me, it's a kind of metaphor for cinema.
For watching movies.
For watching movies, right?
Well, one of the things that movies do, like let's say a lot of people compare movies to video games, but I think the thing that separates them is that one person ultimately is showing us how to watch. So for instance, I think about this last shot. Is that what, like, we don't have the power to look over at Harry. What we're seeing, Coppola is controlling that we're looking at Harry. Now we're looking at an empty space. Now we're looking at Harry, an empty space. So for me, I wonder from that point of view, okay, then I think about, okay, what kind of perspective are we supposed to look at Harry from? And I think also about the shot above that opens the film. I said it in my short introductory essay, but I think we're seeing a God's eye point of view on the film. What I wanted to explore more is, what is it saying about a God's eye point of view? Because as we've talked and as we've, it's made me think like, okay, Harry wants to see but not take part. So he's almost looking at it from that deistic point of view of there is a God, there is a creator, but he doesn't interact in our lives. There was a beginning, but he doesn't do anything to us, for us, doesn't care about us. But that's not obviously the world that he wants to live in. He wants to live in a world where things can be done for other people. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, that opening bird's eye view is extraordinary on many levels, just visually, but also theologically. It really stands right at the beginning of the movie as a kind of invitation for the viewer to reflect upon the fact that we are all being watched. We are all subjects of God's loving providence. But God is all-knowing. God is all-loving. God loves us. He knows what's good for us. And so he is able to look into our hearts and see what we need. And we, in our freedom, have the capacity to respond. Harry, it seems, usurps this godlike role of looking into people, but he's not all-knowing, right? No. He's not all-loving. He is seriously flawed. And so I think part of Coppola is raising the question, is this even something that's ethical? Should we even take up this task of trying to survey, given all of the dangers that flow from really original sin?
Yeah, because I think still that Harry has a bit of a God complex, that his work has given him a sense of omniscience, because he can look at time over and over again. He owns these moments in time, and he thinks that he can see further. He thinks that he's omniscient. Of course, we realize at the end that he's not. He is his perception is completely flawed. And I think I know you don't want to talk about, you don't want to like put theological things onto a movie with no purpose. We've
already seen though that Coppola is inviting us really, I think, to do that at the beginning, I think, I wouldn't push it too far, but
Yeah.
I think there is a theological underpinning of the movie that is presented in that opening shot that we can't ignore.
Well, I mean, let me let loose just as a
Okay.
layman. Just I think that the park that we're seeing is a microcosm of the Garden of Eden. I think that Anne and Mark are stand-ins for Adam and Eve, who are trying to usurp God, who the stand-in in this case for them would be the executive. They want to be like God. And Harry, I think that he, in a way, thinks that he's their protector, but at the end, it might turn out that he is the snake, that he has actually helped. He's actually helped Anne and Mark achieve their goal of being like God and killing God, so to speak. And that, so this is me. I'm just going, there's something in this water.
What I do see is in that opening shot, and we look down at Union Square there in San Francisco, and I think, while I'm not as perhaps quick to make these Edenic connections, which I think, this is the great thing about watching movies and thinking about them, is sometimes we'll take them in directions that are fruitful, even if they are not explicitly intended by the director or the artist. And I think that's legitimate. We can, to me, it's not always a question of what the director intended or what the artist intends. The question is, what has the artist produced?
Right.
And sometimes that takes on meaning that perhaps was not explicitly intended, because we're taking our life experience, we're taking our values, and we're having a conversation with the vision of the director. So I'm not opposed at all to making these things that might not be explicit. But here's where I would agree with you. Absolutely, it seems to me that it is a symbol of humanity, the whole spectrum of human experience. You could say we see in this vast swath of people, different kinds of people, homeless people, happy people, sad people, people with problems, right? People who are just trying to grab lunch, people who have really very evil intent, like Mark and Anne, and people like Harry who are trying to find their way. So I like that part of it.
Well, I think it's just like, to me, death of the artist, a lot of people take that to mean that the director is not the primary voice of a film. I don't agree with that whatsoever. Sometimes he's not, sometimes the actor, but there is going to be one primary voice. But what I do take it to mean is that the movie is what the movie is. Right. You can make a movie and maybe it will have a pro-life connotation. And if the evidence is there, whether or not you intended it, I think it happens. Sometimes a director doesn't have control over how a film is perceived, and they could have accidentally put something in there that they didn't intend.
Well, again, this is a flowing process, this process of receiving a work of art and bringing to the work one's own history, which the director doesn't know about when he produces the work, right?
Yeah.
So your concerns, your values, your history, your life experience, it's an encounter. Again, a conversation, which leads to lots of different reflections and lots of different directions that we take it. It's so exciting. So I love talking about watching movies and talking about movies with other people, because you're seeing things that maybe I didn't see, maybe I see things you didn't.
That's why I wanted to have you on, so that you could, I gave my perspective in my essay, but the whole idea is like I talk and then I listen, because I just want to hear what everyone's talking about. And
me too.
There you go. So I asked those 3 questions. Why does Harry love jazz? Who's watching Harry? And I want to close with my first question last, because the first image of Harry that we see overhead is Harry Call in this translucent raincoat in broad, blinding daylight. And he's wearing this throughout the entire film.
Just about.
Yeah. Whenever he's out and about, he's got this raincoat. For me, I wonder if it says something about his personality, that he's always waiting for it to rain. He's always, it's a way of saying that he's always prepared for the worst in a way. But Coppola's interpretation on the commentary was that he wanted that to be a symbol for transparency, that there are many transparent surfaces, some that, I mean, if you think about it, don't actually make a ton of sense. Like in his office, there is just a translucent sheet of plastic hanging in different parts of his office. So it does, that does come through quite a bit, but I wonder how you see this raincoat, what it can mean.
Well, I think this idea of it's translucent is noteworthy. Also, when you consider the name Harry Caul, C-A-U-L, Caul is actually a word that means a membrane of a newborn. So that you could say that the coat is literally a caul, right? That covers Harry, that we see through. And finally we do see through, even though he's trying to block everyone from seeing through. We are able to see through. And he has 6 locks on his door. Now he has another layer of clothing to try to keep himself from the outside world, but it's not working.
So you told me about this notion of the caul, and I had absolutely no idea that is what I didn't know what a caul was. But it's kind of perfect because apparently it's his birthday. Right. the film opens on his birthday.
But basically, the same time he begins to have a conscience about what's going on.
Oh yeah. Absolutely.
So there's maybe a new birth that's taking place in him. And so he has a caul.
I just think that's kind of a beautiful interpretation that goes into Coppola's interpretation of the transparency of the caul and of a birth of his conscience, his conscience in a way. Well, Dr. White, thanks so much for coming on this show. It's been a real pleasure. I hope we can do it again in the future.
It's been my pleasure. Again, you never need to twist my arm to watch a movie or to talk about a movie, so I am at your disposal anytime.
Is there anything about the cinema you'd like to make sure that people, that you would like people to walk away if they're listening to this podcast and try to think about it differently? Well,
maybe the question of how to receive films, how to watch a film is something that's a skill that we, I think, develop by watching movies. And I would just say we should try to avoid this idea that cinema is merely a diversion from reality, and rather think about movies, first of all, what is the visual language that is being employed? How is cinematic technique being used? If you're watching the movie 1917, probably you should notice that the director is trying to make it look like it's done all in one shot. So we should get in the habit of asking what the visual language of a film is and why it's being used in that way. But then, secondly, to step back and say what's being communicated by that language. What is the meaning? Is the film leading us to what is true, good, and beautiful? If so, how? Or is it not being true to life? And if so, how? So we should be critical in our reception of movies. And when we do that, movies can be a wonderful opportunity for growth, for even evangelization as we engage our culture and talk about films that even culturally compromised films that can still be very helpful to us and our dialogue with culture.
That's what this show's all about, craft and conscience. And I'm
And
so
that's
happy.
it.
So happy you're able to
I
join
love
us.
what you're doing.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for joining us. This was the Catholic Film Club. I'm Michael Coy. Every month we cover a new film, and I'll be putting out an introductory essay and with questions that you can answer, and I'll read them out on the show just like I did today. Next month we're covering Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio, the stop motion one, not the remake done for Disney Plus. Find that on Netflix. It's a beautiful exploration of humanity, really. And you can find us on our social media. And again, this is the Catholic Film Club, brought to you by the Center for Catholic Media at Benedictine College in Atchison, Kansas. God bless.